I was young and naive. I didn't know what burning flesh smelled like. But I'll never forget that smell now. However, we got there, and it was a couple who'd been hit by a 18-wheeler, and they were in a little sedan, and I think the smell probably lingers more. Earlier, I had an officer had keyed up, and I couldn't make out what they were saying, so I had to do an entire roll call to make sure that every officer on that screen's okay. And I think that was really overwhelming for somebody new to a system, and I might have lived here for a little while, but I didn't grow up here in my formative years, so I didn't know the geography as well. And trying to learn all of this at once without somebody to guide you in those busy moments, you start to question yourself all the time. Am I doing the right thing? Am I going to get somebody hurt? And I needed a drink after that day, that's for sure. I cannot begin to explain the stress that I would feel hearing Kristen, my sister or her partner, asking for help or yelling on the radio or getting on the ground, so chasing a suspect in a foot pursuit. That's stress because I can hear what's going on, but I can't see, I can't help. It would be a lot easier to hear about it after the fact instead of being there and feeling partially responsible that if something goes wrong, that's on me.
You're listening to the ATO Bridging the Divide podcast, brought to you by the Assist the Officer Foundation.
Since 1999, the ATO has given assistance to the first responder community, and now we want to give them a platform to hear their incredible stories.
We also want to hear the stories of the many people that support us.
Our community is small, but it is strong.
We have differences. We don't always agree. And we all make mistakes.
But together we can grow, we can heal.
And we can learn from those mistakes.
And together we can bridge the divide.
Welcome back, ATO family and Bridging the Divide listeners. I'm Kristen Green, and I'm here today with the brilliant Misty Van Kuren and Joe. I am truly honored to introduce today's guest, as she is one of the people I admire the most. Born in Texas, she grew up in Northern Virginia, where she obtained her EMT basic certification while in high school. She went on to work for the Fairfax County Department of Public Safety Communications, where she has won awards for Excellence in Police Dispatch, a Meritorious Action Award, Excellence in DPSC Supervision, and a Fairfax County Outstanding Performance Award. For 14 years, she has dedicated herself to excellence in call taking, police dispatching, fire dispatching, and training. She is the voice behind the radio, a calming fixture to guide and direct officers in a crisis. She is the voice on the phone directing citizens in CPR, hostage negotiation, and basic first aid. And she's the tone that wakes up firefighters from their slumber. She taught me what an asset an experienced and calm dispatcher can be during her brief period dispatching for Dallas PD. Her incredible sense of duty to the officers, firefighters, citizens, and coworkers she serves is apparent in her leadership skills and attention to detail and training. She has made it through 2 major heart conditions and a life-changing multiple sclerosis diagnosis, which has knocked her on her ass more than once. And each time she gets knocked down, she has managed to surmount each obstacle with grace and poise when others doubted she could. Each time, her lovely wife Jam has been by her side with her precocious dog Tex. Today we welcome Gillian Ethridge. Welcome, Gillian and Jam.
Thank you.
Welcome.
That was sweet. I don't know what to say from that.
I wrote that.
You did a great job.
So, Gillian, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Are you excited? Are you nervous?
I'm a little nervous.
Really?
Yeah.
You look. You were.
Do I look
You were all
nervous?
cocky last night. Like.
Was I?
Yeah.
I'm trying to look like George Strait.
Well, we were. Yeah. For the listeners, we went and saw the King George Strait last night and out the Dickies Arena, and he was incredible.
It was. It's my bucket list. So.
What was your favorite song he sang?
That he sang?
Yeah.
Run.
Okay.
Is that the one Jam
he
Franklin?
he had a.
No, that was Amarillo by Morning.
Oh yeah. Well, he had a weird. He had a song that he put out for that tequila that it was basically an entire song for a tequila that he's apparently endorsing, a whole song.
Have you tried it?
No, but I'm interested just because he drinks it.
Yes, of course.
Cortico, is that the name of it?
Codigo.
Codigo. Sorry, George.
I was like, you should apologize.
I did. He doesn't. You think he listens to this?
He might. I'm going to send it to him.
You really? Yeah. Yeah. All right. So you're in town. Y'all came into town just to go to George Strait with us last night, and then hang out with the family. And I roped you into this. You sent me your bio. Good Lord, a year ago. It's about almost a year ago.
Probably.
And you tell the listener where you're living now.
I live in Fairfax. Well, I'm sorry. I don't live in Fairfax County, Virginia anymore. I live in Bristow, Virginia, so about 25 miles outside of Washington, D.C.
With you and Jam. So when's the last time you were here?
It's been 3 years.
See. So, and I do not like doing Zoom calls or Zoom podcasts because just the sound and then also the personal feel. And you don't get when you're Zooming with somebody, you don't get the added bonus of seeing the video that I just showed you right before we started recording. So can you describe to the listener the video that never, you know what?
It
Never
was
mind.
scientific, I think.
Yeah, it was educational. It was very wholesome.
Family friendly.
Very family friendly. I'll maybe put it out and I'll post it online on the ATO Facebook page.
You could endorse it, I think.
Yeah. You ready to dive into this?
Let's go. I hope.
If I do the rest of it in the British accent, is it gonna throw you off?
If you can maintain that, I think you should just switch between Australian, maybe.
Yeah. All I can say is, "Good day, mate." That's it. That's my extent. All right. Talk about where you grew up.
So we initially, until about 7, we lived in Greenville, Texas. And then when we were 7, we moved to Fairfax County, Virginia, for my dad's job, and lived in a very, I guess, wholesome neighborhood, and got to go visit Washington, D.C. on field trips and just be exposed to a lot of different culture and things that I would have never imagined here growing up in small town Texas.
Especially Greenville. And Greenville, you moved in 95, right? Back to
Yes.
Fairfax. So Greenville is it's east of Dallas. It's about almost an hour east, and it is small towny. It's still kind of small towny. Very wholesome, like that video you were shown.
I would equate those the same.
Yeah. That was probably going on last night somewhere in Greenville. How much of a culture shock was it moving from Greenville up to the D.C. area?
I think it's pretty crazy. So I know that, I don't know if melting pot's still the term, but there's just so much variety there, and we were not exposed to that growing up here. We grew up, and I don't want to call my parents out, but we spent the majority of our time in a bar down here called The Rail, and then we end up in Virginia, and it's just so different. There's people you never thought you'd meet, and you're, I guess, led to believe you're around all these high-powered people because Fairfax County is a pretty wealthy county in the nation, so it's different.
It's real Stefford, I would say. Like, anytime we go out there or fly back out there, I'm always like, every lawn is perfectly manicured and all the houses look really perfect. And it's definitely a culture shock between Dallas and Fairfax County.
It is. I think it's one of the top 5 richest. It's somewhere at the top 5 richest counties in the nation, and you can definitely tell. I appreciate all the people there. It's just a very different world. People don't hold doors open. People don't say ma'am and sir, and I think you just don't have that friendly hey on the sidewalk to just a random stranger.
Yeah, and you just don't see as many different cultures in Fairfax, I think, or different people in Fairfax as you kind of do in Dallas. So it was definitely different when I moved down here. I feel like when you're here, you're like, this is definitely not the same.
It's warmer here.
You're a twin, Kristen, and you've had a lot of physical elements throughout your life that and some of them very unique. And on your bio, you mentioned the Wolff-Parkinson
White
syndrome. Can you explain what that is? I've never heard of that.
Without getting super in depth, basically, since your heart works like a circuit, my heart had what they call an accessory pathway, so it's shortened the circuit, so it would beat faster, and my heart rate would routinely get over 200, sometimes up to 250, and naturally very uncomfortable. I was very fortunate that they found it. I had bronchitis or something, and they took me, because I had chest pain from coughing, they took me to the hospital, did an EKG, and found it, and it could have been very bad because mine was pretty severe.
And how old were you when that happened?
14.
You were pretty. You love sports.
I do.
Right? And you love athletic. Athletic events. And did you play sports?
I was playing basketball at the time. I mean, I've played a variety of sports, but at the time, basketball was my passion.
And how did that? What happened when you got diagnosed with that, as far as your athletic career?
Because I could not take medication to control it, I was not able to play basketball. So they went in and did one of the surgeries, which failed, and then went in and did a second surgery, and that failed also. They thought it was good to go, but for about 6 weeks I was able to play again, and after that they said that it had come back and had to have another surgery to essentially destroy that part of my heart and never be able to play, at least on a high school team.
And being that young, the feeling and disappointment of having that to take away one of your passions, how did you deal with that?
I wish I remembered. It was a blow. I think it was pretty devastating because that was a lot of all my friends played, and I was very fortunate to play with some really awesome basketball players throughout the time. But I think I just didn't really have a choice but to find something new and probably get into trouble around the house more, I guess.
You've had to endure a lot, especially physically, and the listeners are going to hear a lot more. So I could see why that one is so far in the distant memory, because you've had a lot of other shit go on that you've had to overcome, and here you are. You're still going. In high school, you had a passion for the first responder world. Can you tell us about that?
Fairfax County, we're super fortunate. They have a lot of vocational programs where you can get sent off to another school for a period. And I started doing EMT because I wanted to get out of school for a period. And I started it probably my sophomore or junior, probably my junior year. And I fell in love with it. It was the most amazing class ever. The plan was that you're able to get your EMT basic before you graduate. And we were the first class that Fairfax County had hosted with it. I credit my amazing instructor. She has shaped my life forever, but it opened a lot of doors for me. And my dream was to be in the fire department. However, with my heart condition, that wasn't going to happen. So it at least started my, career path and my desire to be involved in something.
So did you know early on that with the heart condition alone that you were did that just kind of pull you out of being a firefighter?
Yeah, I was not going to be able to pass any sort of physical because it was just so inconsistent at the time with my heart.
And that's before your heart is still evolving and growing at that young age, and what made you gravitate to the first responder world? What did you like most about it?
I mean, I guess it's going to sound cliche, but I think it more for me seemed it was such a family environment. Everybody was just a team, and I really enjoyed that the most. I could probably say, yeah, I wanted to help people. Like, And I did, but I think it was just more the family atmosphere that drew me in.
When you were part of that program, did you do ride-alongs?
So not for that. We did one for that specific program, but they started an Explorer program for the fire department. We had one for the police at the time, but we were the first fire explorers. So part of that, we got to do a lot of ride-alongs.
Did the firefighters welcome you?
They did. I was very fortunate that one of our advisors was at the station closest to my parents' house at the time. And so I was very fortunate that I got brought into that station and it became an amazing family.
We can't ever get the firefighters to talk about the station. Is she going to break the code?
I wish I could.
Oh.
There was a lot. There was a lot that went down there.
Was there a poll?
There was not a poll.
Oh.
There was not a poll.
Huh. Okay.
There's no dancing at the fire station.
No dancing. There was a lot of things I'm sure that the county probably would wonder what they were doing at the time, but no dancing.
Well, you're keeping it secret.
I'm going to have to because a lot of them still work there.
So, well, you did ride-alongs. Can you talk about what it was like riding along with the firefighters and what all you did?
So I was very fortunate. I got to ride on the medic all the time. And it was definitely, I believe I was maybe 18 at the time. And I don't know that I was mentally prepared for what I was going to encounter at that age. I'm very fortunate that I think it helped me to kind of grow a lot and see what the world was like and have that experience being that young prior to getting into especially what I ended up in. I have a couple calls that I'll always remember, and I think that impacts me more seeing it than hearing it.
What call do you think stuck with you the most?
My first CPR ever, and this I guess will be relevant later, but was a elderly man. He had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and he shot himself with a .22, and so we got on scene, and obviously they attempted CPR for about a minute, but there wasn't anything they were able to do. And I think it sticks with me the most because the gun was kept upstairs and he was not able to get upstairs. So I think it kind of hit home a little bit, especially being the first one and being a little bit more gruesome because with the .22, obviously there was going to be some damage inside the brain before it exited. And my amazing mentor at the time, I guess after every CPR, everybody goes out for ice cream. So we went to Silver Diner and got a milkshake.
We talk about mental health here a lot. And how did you cope with? Was that, it was obviously stuck with you, but was it difficult for you to move past that being so young and that being really the first really horrific thing that you've seen? Or
I think what scares me the most is I was able to compartmentalize that really easily. It sticks with me, but it wasn't something that I really broke down from. I think it was just, I viewed it as it's kind of what you're expecting when you're trying to do that line of work.
So it bothers you more that it doesn't bother you that much?
Absolutely. I talked about my therapist about that a couple times.
So what are some other incidents that you dealt with when you were out in the field that you remember that kind of, again, something else you had to compartmentalize and you've kind of learned from? Because, I would imagine being that young, you're learning with every single call and every experience to make your mind more bulletproof to that type of trauma.
I think the other first one that sticks out is we have an Interstate 66 in our jurisdiction, and we got a call for a car fire, and we got out there, and I was young and naive. I didn't know what burning flesh smelled like, but I'll never forget that smell now. However, we got there, and it was a couple who had been hit by a 18-wheeler, and they were in a little sedan, and they never made it out of the car. And the guy, if I remember correctly, was leaning over, like trying to get the door open for his, I don't know if it was girlfriend, partner, who it was, but there was a female in the car. I think the smell probably lingers more, but it was an interesting, I guess, kind of memory for a young 18-year-old.
Did those firefighters, did they put you to work? Did they give you tasks?
I was super fortunate. They did. They gave me a lot of opportunities to really get hands-on with patients within my purview as a basic, and I got to learn a lot from them to really get me prepared, because at the time I still was trying to go for my medic after I graduated, and they gave me a lot of opportunities to learn from them.
That kind of trauma early on, being what you were 18,
Yes.
19, that most people at that age, they don't see that kind of trauma unless they're experiencing it. They're in the middle of it and they're experiencing it themselves, or they're like a soldier. There's somebody in the military that goes and goes into battle. Even officers, we have to be 21, Misty, to get into that. And
By the time you graduate.
yeah, by the time you graduate to become a police officer here in Texas, and that experience at that young of an age and mind, it's valuable, but it also can have a negative effect. Do you think that starting that young, because we've had the great, Lindsay from DFR that came on, spent 40 years. He started as a 18-year-old in Dallas in the 80s, and that's a lot of trauma early on. And some people just don't deal with it, right? And David Lindsay, I believe he was able to deal with it, but he recognizes now, looking back, that there was a lot of bad habits and bad coping mechanisms that he saw around his fellow firefighters. Early on, could you see from the older firefighters over there, did you see their coping mechanisms? Did you take anything from that?
I think a lot of what I experienced was dark humor, and you've got to laugh if you're not going to cry. And I think that was the main thing. And probably why people got up to some antics at the fire station, just to release that stress. Looking back, can't say that my coping mechanism, I didn't have the tools that I needed at the time, but I don't know that anybody really ever has those tools until you get older and realize, oh, something's wrong. I'm not handling this the way I should be. So I think that looking back, it's easier to have that Monday morning quarterback moment.
You mentioned your instructor, but in the firehouse, did you have any role models?
I did. I had a couple, and one retired not super long after I got into dispatch, but they were just some of the smartest people and willing to do the right thing, even if it skirted lines. And I respect that, because it always came down to the patients being first. And I think that says a lot in this day and age.
Were you the only girl?
I was not. There were a couple. And I think that made it a little bit easier, because they kind of felt like you had somebody that could relate to you and that you could have these conversations with, because I don't want to say that it was a you can't show emotion kind of place, because it definitely wasn't. But I think there's always that fear of showing emotion and somebody judging you for it.
Sure.
Can you talk about how did you get into communications?
Oh, man. After my dreams of being in the fire department were dashed, I, at the time, was dating a gentleman that I met at the fire station. And he suggested I go to communications, because part of the Explorer program, I had to do a sit-along up there, and I was only supposed to be there for 4 hours, and I got there, and I loved it. It was just so much fun. So he suggested, hey, why don't you get into communications? They're hiring. And I thought it would just be a stepping stone, but it was something new every day. It was a way to still have that family feel without being actually in the field.
I think dispatchers and communication get forgotten, and there's such a vital role, because being in the field, we hear their voice, your voice. We establish a relationship, but we don't get to hear your perspective and the things that officers fail to do in the field to involve you, Because when we go through critical incidents, you do too. And we have an outlet and you don't. So we want your perspective.
I am very fortunate in Fairfax County that we have been included in some of the debriefings that they do, especially with the bigger calls. I know I had been dispatching on a call where they had somebody barricaded, and he ended up shooting out of the window at officers. And they actually asked if I wanted to drive out to where they were debriefing at that night. And I think that was a really cool experience to be able to see that. And not too long ago, we had a shooting and a barricade that I assisted with. And they actually had the police department's incident services, their peer support team, came up and they did, well, I guess it was pandemic. We did a Zoom call and they made sure that we're all okay. I don't know that it's always been that way, but it's certainly trending in that direction. And people forget about the dispatchers a lot. I think you could probably equate, especially the call takers, to you're reading a book and you get really into it and then you have no idea how it ends. You don't have that last chapter. So there's times where for a lot of people that causes anxiety, that you don't know how things turn out. And that's probably the hardest part. Hearing the things, that sucks at times, but not knowing what happens at the end is the worst.
Have you ever had an officer visit you?
I have. We, as opposed to Dallas, so Dallas, everybody, the senior dispatchers have their assigned channels, but for us in Fairfax, we sign up for our positions, and I ended up falling in love with these two stations, and I dispatched there all the time, and making that rapport and that relationship. People came up to visit if they were doing a mail run, or people came up and, brought food every once in a while, or drinks, especially if we had a really crappy day. And it was cool to have that connection because you got to know them and you get to hear if their voice sounds off, maybe something's wrong. You can just pick up on these little things, and I think that helped shape me as a dispatcher.
What was the most surprising aspect of it when you first put that headset on and you started listening, and what was the first thing that jumped out that, like, damn, this is tough you have to multitask? I would imagine, like, I couldn't do.
You do have to multitask. Not to sound like a cocky ass, sorry for cursing, but I didn't find the
explicit.
I'd go confidence.
I don't think that I really had an issue with the multitasking aspect. I think it was harder for me that I want to help, but I can't do that in that moment. I'm getting help to them, but the typing and the looking at when we have to go through emergency medical dispatch, looking at different screens and cards, trying to get the right questions and get the right help started, that wasn't hard for me. I think it's more you want to help in that moment and you can't.
I was talking to Jam last night on the way back in that traffic from George Strait about the not getting any closure or finality of an incident, especially when there's officers involved. When you hear officers that you may know and you dispatch for every night, and you hear them screaming, and then it ends, suspect in custody, or you get an ambulance called, and sometimes you don't even know who the ambulance is for. How does that make you feel? How does that affect you? Because you, just like officers, the ball keeps bouncing. You have to go move on right to the next incident, and you may not know. Not having closure, what do you think about that?
I think you can definitely see the adrenaline dump after those moments. You can feel it where you're just exhausted afterwards, but you don't really have a moment to stop, because especially if you're taking calls, that's your only job at that moment, and you don't necessarily have all day to sit there and process that. You've got to jump right back into it. And so I think you don't see that impact until the end of your shift and you're going home. And I know there's been many times that I've come home at the end of the day and I just have nothing left. No offense to my lovely wife, but I don't have a moment. I just don't want to talk to anybody else. And I think that's probably my coping mechanism, is just shutting down and listening to a podcast or music. And because it does impact you. You you worry about the officers, you care about them, and you have some really close friendships with them. And if you don't know at the end of the day that they're absolutely okay in that moment, that's really hard. I've had to listen to officers that I care about deeply calling for help in a very panicked voice. And that moment, you don't have a choice but to address it. However, afterwards, it's kind of like that could have been really bad, and it hit you.
Do you feel like your field experience, although it was brief, was a foundation? Do you think it helped you with your dispatch job?
I think it absolutely did. I think it set me up, one, to not be as impacted by some of the things that we hear every day. I think it helped me with compartmentalization. And I think that, especially going into communication so young, I didn't have any issue with some of the things you can see with newer employees who have not had those experiences in the real world with jobs. I think it helped instill a work ethic that I needed and that I wanted to have.
And then you've went on to pass it on, correct? Don't you train? Don't you teach?
I was so fortunate. I went to the training division because training was a passion of mine. And I've been able to instruct with some really great people, and being able to kind of mentor a new generation it's very fulfilling, but it also, you feel like I can help them do it the way that, at least in my perspective, is the right way. And I want to have that hand in it, because I don't want to be one of those people that sits around and complains about, man, people are they're not getting trained the right way, but not be a part of it. I can't sit around and complain if I don't want to be a part of it. So
if you say training's a passion, I want to know specifically what piece are you the most passionate about, and how do you install it?
I would say police dispatch. It was the first way that I started training, was training people on police dispatch, and I fell in love with it. I know I did not have the tools to be a trainer when I first started, because I just got thrown into it. But I've been so fortunate that I have some amazing people who I've been able to help mentor. And one day I was sitting around feeling sorry for myself because of just my diagnosis, and I decided to throw myself into creating a class because we were struggling. We didn't have police dispatchers, enough of them. And I wanted to help accelerate that process. So I threw myself into revamping and creating we call it Accelerated Police Dispatch Program, and put them through a week-long class with the hopes that it would shorten training time. And I was very ecstatic that we got it certified to be able to, for DCJS, for us, for Virginia DCJS, I got approved for a class. So not that it is taught statewide, but it could be.
That's amazing.
I've seen you really with your training and how detailed and very strict you are with your training. And I know that when you were training on specifically just police dispatch to begin with, you had a waiting list for people that wanted to train with you. Can you kind of talk about what it is that makes you that you feel like makes you a good trainer, and what things you are requiring of your trainees that maybe other people may overlook?
I wish I knew why people wanted to train with me. I think a lot of what I at least tried to instill in people was, I called it OCD, but officer safety was paramount. That was the number one thing. And if that did not happen, we were not going to have a good day, me and the trainee. And so I don't know if people just wanted to continue carrying that mentality. That's how I was trained. I was trained by somebody who is now an officer, and I knew that no matter what, I needed to make sure. I know Dallas doesn't do status checks on officers, but we have to check on officers at a certain time interval, and those things had to get done. And just being very regimented, I think sometimes that helps people. I know it's not everybody's style, but I think that was the main way I was trying to train, was however we get to the end result, I don't care, but we need to make sure that those officers make it home, or that we're doing our best by them.
Well, officers listening to this know what officer safety is in the field, but I don't think we have any idea what that means for a dispatcher.
I think that, to me, obviously, first and foremost, we want to make sure that if you're not responding to the radio, we need to know why.
Okay.
And so we have a couple tools. If they're not answering on the radio, I know that Dallas, there's tones that you guys use when dispatching certain priority calls. We will tone officers out if they're not responding, because our first thing is if they're not responding to the radio, hopefully there's a good reason why. In Fairfax, we check on officers, on anybody who's on a call. We check on them to make sure that they're okay. It just gives us another level of protection. And then when we're talking about dispatching priority calls, making sure you know where they're at any moment is paramount, because especially if you have officers out on, they've set up a perimeter to search for somebody, I need to make sure that I know where they're at, because if they start yelling for help, I might not be able to rely on the computer at all times. Especially technology today makes it difficult. So I think it's just more of an awareness and recognizing that you at that computer see the big picture, because the officers are looking at their perspective of something, but I think it's easier for us. We have a more global view. And I think that's the most important thing to me for officer safety.
Can I just say, it's also like from a dispatching perspective, it's little details. Like she was saying, we need to know where officers are at all times. What that means for a dispatcher sometimes looks like verifying a location. So if you guys mark out on a traffic stop in the CAD or call it out on the radio and you're not sure where you are, or you kind of just give like a common place where everybody in the street knows where that is, but that doesn't mean it's a location in our CAD system. So like we need to verify that exact location and to get it to come up in the CAD. So if you guys do call for help, we can add units right away or get, fire department going. Because if you put it in kind of certain ways and it doesn't verify, it's like extra steps for us to get you the help you need if you need it.
You mean if I tell you I'm at Bruton Bottoms, you can't find me?
Yep.
She seems annoyed.
I think officers sometimes think, oh, she's being rude or she's trying to control me.
We're totally not. We are not like, can you give me your exact 100 block or intersection? We're not trying to be jerks about it. Like, it's just a lot of times the CAD doesn't, I don't care what you guys do your thing, but the CAD sometimes it just doesn't recognize it.
I have a question for both of y'all. The annoying clicking of the radio.
You should see their faces.
Yeah,
I know.
She's dry heaving over here. Gillian.
I'll start with, in Fairfax, that's not really a thing in the way that it is when I dispatched here in Dallas. I was, I think, explaining to Kristen the other day that when we're dispatching, our radio traffic will go across no matter what. We can still hear officers speaking, or if somebody keys up and clicks that mic, we can hear it, but our traffic's still going out. Whereas here in Dallas, that clicking, I always found to be used in a not I'm trying to key up to give something helpful way. I mean, there was some times where I think the clicking was trying to help somebody else out, but I think overall, that is probably one of the most annoying things. It's in the top 5.
Agreed. It was so that was something I had never experienced either until I came to Dallas, and I was like, what is this clicking? Like, what is happening? So yeah, I mean, it's, like she said, sometimes I think it's for the benefit of the officers, like, hey, you're saying something you shouldn't be saying, we're just going to click over it. But it, tends to be like a thing for us because you couldn't get out over there.
For the listener, some of the other police agencies across the country that listen, and as well as the non-first responder community that listens, clicking of the radio in Dallas is quite often used as displeasure with either the dispatcher or somebody that gets on the radio, whether it's a supervisor calling off a chase or the dispatcher and one of the officers butting heads, which it does happen a lot. And you could start hearing clicking of a radio, and Misty, it's really common, and it could be really dangerous, because in Dallas, when you're doing the clicking It's very juvenile, and I get the frustrations in some because I've been frustrated with the dispatcher as well. But I've never even being a young officer, I did not partake in that clicking because it is kind of stupid.
It's a snarky gesture.
It is, and like it happens here in Dallas because our chase policy is so strict. You hear it a lot now that supervisor calling off the chase, and then you hear just, and it's and there could be somebody calling for help in that time of jackassery.
I think part of it is too in Dallas, there's not a push to talk ID, so whoever's clicking that mic, there's no identifier in Dallas. So I don't know who's clicking that mic. I don't know if it's somebody clicking solely truly trying to get out, or if it's somebody just voicing, well, I guess metaphorically voicing their displeasure.
I think the biggest problem, there are times where when you are genuinely in trouble and you're trying to get over the radio that you need assistance, like code 3, which is lights and sirens. You very rarely have a chance to like get on the radio and say, hey, this is, Yankee 219, I need cover code 3. It may just be this really short burst of transmission. And if there's clicking going on, it's really easy to miss. And if you're not familiar with the radio, that may not be as apparent, but it is really easy to miss somebody calling for cover when they really need it.
That's one of my greatest fears.
So you obviously came in dispatch for Dallas at some point. Can you kind of talk about, before we get into Dallas, can you kind of talk about the differences in dispatching and call taking in the different kind of agencies? Obviously, Fairfax County and Dallas are different. I know that Jam has worked for Capel and Fairfax City. So can you guys kind of go into that just a little bit?
I think there was a lot of shock when I got to Dallas because I know I had spoken to you before coming down, and I was just amazed that status checks weren't a thing. Just routinely, 10 minutes or 30 minutes on calls, and that seemed so crazy to me. And I remember voicing that when I first got here. And my trainer at the time said, you'll see, you won't have time, because Dallas was so busy. And I guess the best way of describing that difference was, obviously there's procedural differences, but we have a queue for our pending calls that need to be dispatched. And in Fairfax, we don't have the same call volume that Dallas does. And so if there was a call in my pending queue, I was stressed because I didn't like seeing that. And I wanted to get that out right away. And then I got to Dallas and I saw calls holding for a little while. And I remember seeing 30, 40 calls at a time holding. And I think there was a day I didn't get my queue clear until 3 a.m. And it's just such a crazy difference, probably the call volume, and I think there's a lot of procedural differences, and obviously learning the terminology, but that was probably the biggest thing for me was the call volume.
So similarly, yeah, I worked for two much smaller agencies than Dallas and Fairfax County. They were like 60 officers tops. The jurisdictional boundaries were like 12 square miles. You had, 4 or 5 officers on shift at a time. So super small. And I came to Dallas thinking like, okay, I can do this. In fact, I remember the major in my interview, one of the last questions she asked me was, do you think you're prepared to dispatch, for 60, 70, 80 officers at a time? And I was like, yeah, no big deal. Definitely a big deal. I think mainly just because like Gillian said, the call volume and also the priority. So it's not like you're taking, the 50 parking complaints are holding. Like these are all priority 1 calls that are needing to get out, or priority 2 calls, and it's a big deal.
Can you explain to the listener with the priority system? Just because there's a lot of people that don't understand priority 1s, 2s, and 3s.
Do you want to go ahead? I'll let you take that.
So priority 1 is obviously a very high priority calls. In Fairfax, we go from 0 down to 8. And the higher the priority, obviously, the sooner you want to get it out. And they're color coded also to kind of help that stand out a little bit. So if you're holding priority 1s or 2s, which I have done here while dispatching, that's stressful because you know that somebody needs help. We just, at the time, there were no officers to send. And if you had a sergeant or a lieutenant in service, you were sending them because we had to get those calls out. And
So can you give an example of what a priority 1 would look like for somebody who doesn't know what that is? Like give a call or event type.
I'll speak to Fairfax at the moment. A priority 1 for us would be a robbery that had just occurred or in progress, or a burglary of an occupied dwelling, a stabbing, a shooting, something along those lines. Those are priority 1s. And in Fairfax, those do not hold. I can't say the same has always been true other places I've worked.
Yeah, in priority 2s and 3s, we have, it goes all the way down to like theft and alarm calls or the lower levels for priority. But every city is everything's run on numbers, whether you're working in a major city or you're working in a hospital or everything. There's always something that people use to quantify success or failure for any organization. Response times. And the differences between, I would imagine, Fairfax versus Dallas, all the way up to our top chief and even the city leaders, the response times always come up whenever you mention having a priority 1, which is it's a pretty serious call that comes in. A shooting or stabbing or assist officer, those are toned out and you go. But how much pressure from you're a supervisor now, but you have somebody over you, right? As far as and you being a supervisor, is response time something you have to stay on top of?
I think there's always going to be ebbs and flows as different things happen in your jurisdiction. There's obviously sometimes different focuses on which calls you have priority calls that need to get out, but if something happens, then there's a heightened focus on a particular call type. We in Fairfax are very fortunate that we don't have priority calls that hold like that. Our response times for police for true priority calls are not very long. And I know if I were to see a call holding in my supervisory position that is a priority call that needs to get somebody out there, we will pull from other stations. It's a little bit easier in Fairfax to do that, to have officers from other stations go to priority calls. Not as simple as it would be in Dallas unless it was an assist.
When you were in Dallas, how was it?
There was a significant amount of pressure on getting calls out. I remember sitting one day and I had a couple calls left on my board and I think I had a lieutenant in service, but there was a panhandler call holding and I was asked why that call was still holding. And it was just a crazy, I think, thing to see because I know it's important to get calls out, but there is a priority system for a reason. And you've got to make sure there are sometimes officers available in other parts of that station to be able to respond to a priority call when it comes out. Because if people are tied up on panhandlers or some of the lower priority calls that don't have an imminent threat to life or property, how do you justify that at the end of the day?
Well, in Dallas, what I know, because you have every division, we have 7 divisions here in Dallas, 1 through 7. And the ground that you have to cover to get from one side of the division to the other, it's pretty extensive, especially in Southeast and South Central, because it's just you got traffic factored in. And back before South Central opened, Misty, remember how Southeast was enormous?
We drove 100 to 150 miles a night on our vehicles. Do you guys work 8-hour shifts, 10-hour shifts?
Our normal shifts are technically 12 and a half hours. So we do a roll call at either 6:30 a.m. or 6:30 p.m. And then we go from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. or 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Our officers just got moved to that as well.
I didn't realize they work 12-hour shifts. How do you sit with that in your ear for 12 hours? I cannot complain at all about where I work because I have seen, obviously, other agencies. We get hour breaks typically, staffing dependent, obviously. And if we are able to,
we can get up for 15 minutes here and there, and it gives you that opportunity to kind of decompress. And we don't sit in the same position all day long. We can if that's available, but we can also move around. So the way Fairfax works, you're either call taking, you're police dispatching, you're fire dispatching, or you're doing our Teletype, which handles our warrants and all of the administrative stuff. And so having the opportunity to kind of switch around, I think, provides a little bit of a relief.
When you guys were in Dallas, were those same opportunities there? And did you work 12-hour shifts?
We worked 8-hour shifts in Dallas. However, there was very rarely an opportunity to get up and take a break. There were days where we did not have relief, and you could not even get up to go to the bathroom if you had to. And it was just mind-boggling to me because I can't imagine having to hold it for 8 hours.
Like #no channel. Love it. Love it.
What does that mean?
Basically that there was no relief. So once you plugged in. There wasn't anybody to come relieve you. And since in Dallas, dispatches under the police department, our bosses were you folks, officers, they weren't able to take a channel for you. They didn't know how to dispatch. So unless there was some kind of crazy emergency, another dispatcher could maybe take your channel for you for 2 minutes to let you go to the bathroom, but usually not, because as you know, there's way too many officers to be responsible for somebody to pull your channel for you. So you had to sit. I mean, that wasn't like couldn't go to the bathroom, couldn't get up to get lunch. You were just at the console.
I think I would say the majority of our officers have no idea what you guys go through.
I think it's important for people to have that perspective because especially in Dallas, when you are just especially third watch, you're getting hammered just call after call after call and getting pressure to get those calls out, and you're getting some feedback from the officers who are not necessarily always happy with some of the calls they're dispatched to or where they're dispatched to, but they're not getting those breaks. They're not able to get up and have a moment to decompress sometimes. And it's a tragedy because the toll that takes mentally and physically is absolutely overwhelming for people. And it's not good for the mental health aspect of them.
Feedback's a really nice way to put that, by the way.
Thank you. I was trying to say that nicely.
You also, when you were in Dallas, I know that they're very short-staffed. And I think that you guys are kind of going through the same thing right now in Fairfax. But I think it had a different impact in Dallas. Can you talk about how that was?
Well, while I was still in training, I had finished my first phase of training, and I did that on deep nights. And I want to say it was my first or second day on third watch in the second phase of training. And I walked in, and I didn't have a trainer assigned to me at the time. And I remember a major looking at me and asking me if I had dispatched for a big department before. And I said yes. And I was either given we're going to be no channel if you need a trainer, or you can handle it. And I've got 2 senior dispatchers on either side of you. And so I got to sit on South Central all by myself in my second phase of training.
Wow.
And for the listeners, South Central is a very busy channel. That's not an easy channel to dispatch.
I think I was very humbled that day.
Tell us why.
I was confident before in my multitasking abilities, and I don't think that I was struggling with that. However, I vividly remember we had probably 2 robberies that were holding in the same apartment complex. And so I announced it. Hey, I need people to go. And I, as we needed to, kept announcing it, but we had nobody to go. And it ended up turning into, I believe, a stabbing because one of the people in the complex was like, I'm just going to take matters into my own hand. And it held for probably 20 or 30 minutes. And the pressure of that, because I start thinking I'm doing something wrong. Or I had talked about the push to talk earlier. I had an officer had keyed up and I couldn't make out what they were saying. So because there's no push to talk in Dallas, so it doesn't identify who's trying to key up, I had to do an entire roll call to make sure that every officer on that screen's okay. And I think that was really overwhelming for somebody new to a system. And I might have lived here for a little while, but I didn't grow up here in my formative years, so I didn't know the geography as well. And trying to learn all of this at once without somebody to guide you in those busy moments, you start to question yourself all the time. Am I doing the right thing? Am I going to get somebody hurt? And I needed a drink after that day, that's for sure.
Can you explain roll call for the listeners?
I had to go through every single unit on my screen, everybody, and call them and have them acknowledge to say that they were okay. And that took quite a while because there are a lot of officers on one channel in Dallas.
That day at South Central, you said it humbled you. When you went home after that and got a cocktail, what was going through your head?
I think we went to, I want to say the Double Wide, and we sat outside, and might have been the Katy Trail Ice House. I don't know. Great bars either way. But we went and had a drink, and I remember thinking I was proud of myself that I didn't cry or walk away at that point, but I think it really gave a wide range of emotions of Dallas is a very different place to dispatch for, and from very different aspects that in Fairfax, you can still get up no matter what. You might not get an hour break, but you can still get up no matter what. And so that aspect that there is that mental health concern and that physical well-being concern, that humbled me a lot, that it was not going to be that way here, whether that was the fault of people just not wanting to come to work or whatever led to that. And I think also, I thought that I would be able to handle the stress of dispatching 120 officers at a day, but when you're holding calls, it feels personal almost sometimes. It feels like I'm not doing enough to get calls cleared.
You said feels personal. I don't know if you guys are going to segue into this or not. Can you talk about personally dispatching for your sister and how that affected you?
Well, I used to think when I was a young, naive person before I dispatched for my sister that it wasn't going to be that bad. And I cannot begin to explain the stress that I would feel hearing Kristen, my sister or her partner asking for help or yelling on the radio or getting on the ground, so chasing a suspect in a foot pursuit. That's stress because I can hear what's going on, but I can't see. I can't help. It would be a lot easier to hear about it after the fact instead of being there and feeling partially responsible that if something goes wrong, that's on me. If I don't get help soon enough or if I can't find her, because I've got to imagine when you're running down the road in the nighttime, you can't see a lot around you. So I think that pressure of I need to know where people are at all the time from just a little computer screen map. It's not like I got GPS that's following you on Google Maps or something. I'm looking at a screen, and that's a lot of pressure. I remember hearing my sister on the radio yelling. They had an assist, and they were struggling with somebody who had a glass bottle underneath, and you hear the radio key up, and you just hear stop resisting. And that was there was an adrenaline dump after that, because if something happened, I don't know how I'd be able to recover from that.
The irony with this is you barely dispatched for me when you were in Dallas because you didn't like it. And we had a primary dispatcher on Channel 3 who's an excellent dispatcher. But you were my favorite dispatcher that I'd ever had, not because you were my sister, but because I really think that you're the best dispatcher I've ever had. And that was the best example for me. That was the first time I've seen how a really excellent dispatcher can really shape a situation or really shape a hot call that's going on, whether it's a shooting or a perimeter or whatever needs to go on, because you're calm and you're getting the information that we need. You're not getting a bunch of BS that we don't need out on the radio. You're not just talking to talk, and you're controlling the channel like you need to, because we'll still have people that have been on patrol for a while or new on patrol. We have a hot call and people are getting on the radio like, add me, all this unnecessary stuff because, we already know you're going to the hot call. Just go and, you'll get added. So you are excellent at controlling the radio and getting the information that we need, and you're on top of calling Air 1 if we need Air 1. You're on top of calling a K9 if we need K9. You're on top of organizing a perimeter, because there are some officers that still can't organize perimeter, and I haven't done it in 4 years, so I'm not judging anybody. But so you were my favorite dispatcher to dispatch for me, and I was very disappointed that you never wanted to dispatch for me, and then when you left Dallas.
I don't remember you being as enthusiastic about me as a dispatcher when I sent you to a stabbing 10 minutes before the end of your shift.
I didn't want to go to that call.
Because I got a lot of choice words after that from you and your partner.
Did you get any clicks? I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
I think they knew better.
Yeah, I would never mind click.
Whenever you heard her calling for cover and you knew, how quickly did you realize that it was actually her and her partner?
I obviously can recognize her voice very easily. So that was easy for me. I think the hardest part is when you just hear a small little portion of something and you're second guessing that constantly. Is that what I heard? I don't know if it's a twin thing, but very attuned to, if she's going to sound different on the radio, I'm going to hear that stress in her voice more so than any other officer that I would ever dispatch for, because I care about everybody, but that's my twin.
Yeah. You have to step into action. You have a job to do. The job to do is verify that that's them calling for cover and then find their location, all in a matter of half seconds.
It feels like an eternity, I think, in those moments. I think one of the calls that Kristen's talking about, I remember very vividly, and I remember talking to her afterwards, and her, we're replaying it and debriefing, and I'm just going over all what I thought I could have done better, and it felt like it was taking forever for me to do things. But I think on playback, you hear it doesn't take that long, but you're just hyper-focused.
You said you remember it vividly. Tell the listener a little bit more about it. Explain it, walk them through it, paint a picture if you can.
I was minding my own business, trying not to dispatch for my sister. And we had dispatched, I don't even remember what the call was for. I just remember them marking on scene with somebody. And then I just remember the radio opening, and you hear yelling, and you hear Kristen's partner yelling, but knowing that Kristen's there, and then you've got a foot chase, and I'm here trying to look and see where are we at on the map, and I don't know any of these apartment complexes people are yelling out. I'm trying to look on a map at that moment and figure that out and pass this information along. But the entire time, I'm just wondering, where is Kristen? Because it's a different level of intensity, because you have... I don't know how I'd go home and explain to my parents, oh, I screwed up and didn't know where this location was. If something happened to Kristen, that's on me. And I don't know how to explain that to people. And ultimately, was she going to get hurt? No, she had a great partner who was going to take care of her. And she's obviously very capable. But I think you just internalize all of this pressure that's your responsibility. It's a big responsibility.
What do you do with that when you get off that shift where you haven't had time to use the restroom, you haven't even had a mental break, and you head home? What do you do with all that?
So we had a fun little ritual that we would use to debrief. Kristen, Jam, and I would sit on a bed and just talk. That was like every night. I don't know why that even started, but having somebody that you can talk to who understands what you're going through to a degree, with Kristen or with Jam, obviously understanding so much more of my side of things, having that outlet to be able to talk to, because I didn't want to drink. I didn't want to just come home and drink every day to get through my stress. Not saying that I haven't at some point in my life used that as a coping mechanism, and that was obviously not the way to go, but having people to talk to helps so much. And I wish I had the fortitude to get into therapy sooner to develop those healthy coping mechanisms, because I'm pretty sure joking on a bed about terrible stuff that you're seeing or hearing all day is probably not the only way to cope, but I think that was all we had the tools for at the moment.
I was going to say, I think that too, like those bed chats gave us perspective, right? So that closure that we sometimes don't get, like we could get from her and say, hey, okay, what happened with this call? Or this is what we were thinking on our side of the radio. How is it for y'all in the street? And it gave us, or at least for me, I felt like, because I did a ride along during training, but just having the extra knowledge of what it was like for you all on the street made it a little bit easier for me. And then I think maybe vice versa for her. Like, well, these are the steps we have to go through when you guys call a 15, or like, this is what it looks like on our end, whatever's going on, right? So just knowing what the other person is having to do, I think helps like put you in the right frame of mind when it's like going on.
Maybe we need more bedside chats with officers and dispatchers to get through.
That could probably go way south. Maybe we won't call it bedside chats between officers and dispatchers.
I think there's been some.
There might be, yeah.
There's some pillow talk.
Yeah.
Chats. So you mentioned Signal 15 for the listener. That's an assist officer here in Dallas. Whenever y'all get a Signal 15, so whenever you hear, usually officers don't get on the radio and say, Signal 15, Signal 15. It's just that you hear an element and you hear some screaming. And in that case with Kristen and her partner, it was a stop resistance, and you recognize their voice. There's several people that you would not recognize their voice, and you have to figure out what element it actually is, who's calling for cover, and you may just hear half of a sentence. Whenever, and you can tell by people's voices whenever shit's gotten bad and real. What goes through your mind at that moment on a Signal 15? It's a Signal 15. What goes through your mind when that type of call comes up?
I think the first thing is hopefully we know who it is. And I cannot really emphasize enough how helpful push-to-talk IDs are, and it's not meant to be Big Brother, but knowing who's keying up in that moment is incredibly valuable, because I may not be able to have GPS on their physical person. I can at least narrow down where they are for their cruiser and then work my way from there. So I think the first part is, who is it? And then I know it may be the most annoying question that officers get asked, but we need to know the situation in that moment that's going on. I think it's a little bit different for where I dispatch for now. There's a very clearly defined procedure when we call them signal ones. And there's a very clearly defined procedure for how we handle that. But you're toning it out, you're getting officers started, you've got to locate them, but what is going on and what is the situation? Because that will drastically change how people respond to it and how people get there. And just trying to maintain a global view and to not let their panic become your panic. I sound very monotone on the radio, and I do that for a reason. So when I am amped up, I'm not like high-pitched and screaming. I'm just sounding a little bit more enthusiastic, I guess.
Yeah, you do have a very sexy, like in those
1-900.
1-900, those sex talks.
I've been working on it.
Oh.
Like, you mastered it.
Very nice.
Misty has just looking at me with disgust right now. Yeah, well, yeah. So I want to get into when you got to Dallas and when you met your beautiful wife, Jam. Let's get into that.
Well, our first day at orientation for all of the city employees, I was yet again minding my own business, and this crazy lady starts yelling my name, asking me where we're going to get our badges for the next day of work. And I had no idea who she was, but she somehow knew me, and it was Jam. We ended up hanging out and spending some time together, and she told me I was going to take her on a date, and I then took her on that date because I was scared of her, and I guess moved pretty quickly after that.
Let me just clarify how I knew her name. So Gillian, myself, and one other person were like the only three that were going to be dispatching. And so there was a email string with all of us between us and, like HR. And I looked at it was myself and a coworker from my previous agency, and then one other person on this email, and it was Gillian. Her email address was her first name dot her last name. So then when we're all there at orientation and we're going to get our badges, and they're sending us by division, right? So like dispatch was going together, public works was going together. Well, if I was sitting next to the coworker that came with me to Dallas. So if it's not her and this other person is standing up to go with the police dispatchers, and I remember the email, her name must be Gillian. So I'm not a crazy lady. I mean, well,
No,
maybe
I'm
not.
kidding.
Maybe not from like that perspective. But yeah, then we went and got our badges, and I think I met you guys actually, I invited myself to get drinks with her and another coworker who was a call taker at the time for Dallas. And yeah.
So what year was that?
That was 2015.
So, Jam, what kind of experience did you have before you got here?
So I briefly touched on that earlier. So I worked for a really small agency. Again, it was Coppell, so north of Dallas. Like 65 officers, only 3 fire stations, 4 or 5 officers on a squad. I mean, day shift was a little busier because he had motors, so I don't know, 10. It was a small town, so the call volume was not anything significant. I think before I got to Dallas, I had never had a legitimate a signal 15. I think I did 1 felony traffic stop, maybe. We'd never gotten behind an occupied stolen. Like, the list could go on. It was just a very different style of dispatching. Pretty, like if they were, going to a theft in progress, it was like, whoa, big deal. So it's just a different kind of more chill environment.
How did you adapt to that?
Well, there were some struggles. I can tell you there were some struggles. So I feel like the part I appreciated about Dallas was our little like mini academy. So they didn't just dump you on the floor for on the job training. Like, you did get some background knowledge, and then you did like a day or so of like CAD training, and then they put you on the floor with your trainer. It was a little bit difficult. I think I certainly didn't adjust as well as Gillian did, and we'll talk about how her training went and what they called the program after Gillian went through with training. I think it just took me a little bit. My brain is not as linear as most folks, as hers certainly. So like, I struggled a little bit, but I got there. We did it.
That's a great segue into Gillian's training.
Yes.
Let's
What
hear
did they
about
call
this.
Go ahead, Gillian.
They didn't call it anything.
They sure did.
People made jokes.
Oh, okay.
Because there was obviously some staffing challenges at the time, they did shorten my training to, I think my 3rd phase was only a week. And I then was cut loose and sent to 3rd watch. So I did not have the same length training. It was a little fast-tracked.
She also got a commendation during her training. You care to talk about that?
I don't remember that at all.
I do. I was standing
Tell
behind her
us.
when it happened, because it was the day that we got breaks for once, and I got up and I walked over to her channel. And she was sitting with her trainer, who really wasn't paying attention because the trainer didn't have to, because Gillian just had the channel. It was fine. She was sitting on channel 4. And she was working a jumper, I think on high 5 on 75 or 635, and an occupied stolen simultaneously, seamlessly, no problem.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
And
That's a lot of
was it a
processing.
sergeant or the street supervisor, lieutenant? One of them wrote her commendation for it.
I honestly don't remember this.
Well, as a supervisor, I want to get, we've talked about it before in this podcast about giving people, saying thank you or great job. That's important. How, as a supervisor, do you try to improve morale with commendations?
We, where I'm at in Fairfax, we have an awards program. And every year there is for Telecommunicators Week in April, National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week, to celebrate dispatchers. we have the awards that are handed out. So excellence in call taking, excellence in police dispatch, and so on, to recognize people who are going above and beyond in their craft. I know that's not everything. We also have specific event recognitions, so childbirths, meritorious action, like things that can happen along the way to recognize that. I have always tried to acknowledge everybody's got staffing crisis right now. If there is a fully staffed dispatch center in the nation, I would love to know where they are. But if we have to cut breaks, I think our group of supervisors is big on making sure we provide food for everybody. Nobody wants to cut breaks. I mean, I want to be clear, they can still get up for 15 minutes, which is a luxury not afforded to all departments. But I think just those little things make the biggest difference to everybody. And I personally, with my current shifts, check in with them every single day. And if we have a CPR that they're taking, I want to make sure, and I'll ask them, are you guys okay? Do you need anything? Because that follow-up can mean the world to some people.
No, absolutely. Even officers, there's a lot of young officers that are out there working their ass off, going call to call and doing really good jobs. And it's nice to know that it doesn't go unnoticed by the supervisor, and it's a small thank you to write somebody up, and it can go in their jacket for their resume, and it later on down in their career, it could mean a lot.
I think people focus on the negative things in their files, and I think it's important to balance that out with the positives, because every single day, yeah, most of it's routine stuff we're doing, but to somebody else that means the world. And so if we get those compliments from community members, or if we overhear something, just hey, you rock that, or I'm really proud of you. I think those words, I'm proud of you and I appreciate you, probably mean more than anything to people.
Gillian, we talked about earlier on in this episode about you, all the physical hardships that you've been dealt. Can you talk about the diagnosis of MS and how that hit you?
Well, I had a lot of back problems right before we ended up moving back to Virginia, and I had fallen one day and I had lost feeling in my left foot and part of my left foot. I thought I had just herniated another disc and that would be the end of it. But I progressively started losing feeling in my left leg, and it was a scary time because, your body doesn't work, and if your foot can't feel the ground, it won't hold you up, so you can't walk. And I went to the doctor. They did a spinal fusion. He told me, though, he didn't think that would work to fix the rest of the problems. Ended up getting sent to Georgetown Hospital, which is one of the big hospitals in DC, and they did a week of testing, came back, and my doctor had told me, hey, look, if we're in the Tour de France, Lance Armstrong's MS and all the other racers are other possible diseases. And I went back for a follow-up, and he looked at me and just said, Lance Armstrong won. And that was how he told me that I had been diagnosed with MS. And it was, I think, probably a relief at first, because you finally have an answer. And you kind of can start to figure out what that's going to look like moving forward. But I didn't have function in my left leg. I had no feeling. I know Kristen at one point, poked me with something sharp just for fun. And I had no idea what that was. I just saw her. I saw you do that. It was at my bridal shower.
I think I did that out of love.
I'm sure it was.
You're making it sounds terrible. That was out of love.
But I just continued. They put me in rehab, physical rehab, to try to learn to walk again. And they sat there and said, I don't know that you're ever going to walk again. And that was a really crushing blow, because what do you do with that? Somebody who likes to be active. I was golfing all the time, and I didn't want to sit still. And so I was losing all of my outlets at that time. So it was a long road. That was a long story.
That was a really abbreviated version.
I was
going to
say that. Yeah,
story.
actually,
there was a lot of time in between that where we were pretty sure it was MS, and the doctors were like, okay, but we have to exclude everything else first. So there was testing and testing and testing. And mostly a diagnosis for MS requires an MRI, which Gillian could not have at the time because she has a pacemaker due to another heart condition she had between the WPW and the MS diagnosis. So she couldn't have the MRI, and it took a lot of testing to finally get to where they were like, this is MS and this is what's going on. But I remember that you were in a wheelchair, you were wheelchair bound for a while, and I legitimately didn't think you'd ever walk again. And because it wasn't just the doctors. I mean, we didn't talk to you about it, but I was like, I don't think she's going to walk again. I think that that's a pipe dream. And every time life threw something at you where we didn't think it was possible, you said, hell no.
I think I'm very stubborn, and I had a little pity party for a couple weeks after everything really started hitting me that I didn't have function at the time, not knowing why. That was scary because I don't know what's causing all of these things. And they sent me off to physical rehab, and they kept just saying, oh, just try harder, just more physical therapy or strengthen your muscles. And I didn't know what else I had to give. And so I sat there and I just pushed and pushed and pushed myself, and it was never enough. My leg wouldn't work anymore. And it was devastating. Like, you're sitting there and you're being told you just need to try harder, and you're trying as hard as you can. And that's not good enough. It's not good enough for your body. And there was a lot of days where I sat there and I mourned what I felt like I was losing. I guess I still had to grieve the loss of function of my body and not knowing what was happening. And I got fitted with a really awesome orthotic that allowed me to be able to take steps. It was cumbersome and expensive, but it gave me some sense of freedom. However, those things you guys take for granted, just getting up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, I couldn't do without assistance. Or I had to have somebody that would pick me up when I fell or help me with basic daily activities that you need to survive, like going to the bathroom and showering. And I think that was probably the harder part, but I don't like to focus, I guess, on, they told me I couldn't do it, but I wasn't going to accept that, I guess.
How did you didn't want to accept that. How did you get to a point where you kept going, you were able to finally walk again, and you just wouldn't take no for an answer?
I think the biggest thing was Jam is not good at laundry, and I was getting really tired of waiting on her to get the laundry done.
You're so OCD.
And I found out that I couldn't get into the laundry room at first, and so she was stacking stuff in there where I couldn't see it. And then she would stack.
That's accurate.
That sounds so much like a story for you guys, too.
She would stack dishes in the sink where I couldn't see it at wheelchair height.
I mean,
but they were
right?
there. And so I was like, that can't keep happening. But I think overall I can't sit still. I couldn't do my job the way I wanted to in that wheelchair. So I had to find something else.
Jam, so while you weren't stacking the plates flat and not taking the silverware off to keep the plates elevated so she saw it, what kind of toll did this take on you?
It had its days. I mean, I was really devastated for her. I mean, I think when all of this her first back surgery was 6 months into our dating, so not a whole lot of time. And, she had several subsequent back surgeries, and then all of this MS symptoms kind of all rolled into one. And unfortunately, a lot of the back symptoms, surgery symptoms, and MS symptoms are the same. So she did gloss over a lot, which is fine. But there were like months of time where we didn't know what was going on, and it was a lot of back and forth. And I think I was concerned for her mental health, obviously, as well as physical health. Because there's just things you don't think about, right? You have to like rearrange your home and like are the doors wide enough for the wheelchair to fit through? And how much does the wheelchair weigh? Because you have to carry it up and down the stairs or load it in the car. And she's right. She, drinks Diet Dr. Pepper like it's going out of style. And if she's on the couch and I'm not home, she couldn't get a drink. Like that just loss of independence for even the smallest thing was a big deal. I mean, and I'll let her talk about it if she wants to get into the whole when she got back to work bit and how that changed with adapting, like physically having to adapt to dispatching with being wheelchair bound.
What department were you working for?
With the diagnosis, I was working for Fairfax County.
Okay.
I think I had spent so much time off work. When I first started exhibiting symptoms to when I made it back to work was 6 months. And I am so fortunate that my coworkers did not allow me to miss a single paycheck. They picked me up when I really fell down because we were a family. And I had spent so much time off work just trying to figure out what life looked like, trying to move through a lot of the challenges that I have. And I mean, MS is a really shitty disease. It's embarrassing. And there were a lot of symptoms that I had. And I guess I'll just go all out and say that part of that is a loss of bladder control. And part of that is a loss of a lot of different functions that you have. And that's one thing when you're at home and the safety and privacy of your home, and your wife knows that. She's not going to leave me because of that. But I got to go to work and contend with that. And so people have a really grave misunderstanding of MS and those symptoms. So transitioning, I think the mental aspect was difficult because I then have to explain why I have to go to the bathroom however frequently, or why I get annoyed when people make adult diaper jokes. And then the physical side of it, our building in Fairfax is massive. And I was weak. That was a lot to traverse. And then trying to dispatch. So you step on a pedal to dispatch. And that's how you communicate with officers in the field. We use a pedal. I didn't have a pedal that I could step on at that time. So we had to find a solution. And I'm very fortunate that my current assistant director was very supportive in ensuring that I had what I needed to be able to dispatch. So we found a little button, and I would tape the button on the console, and I would push it either with my stomach or my hand, depending on if I needed both my hands to type, and that's how I communicated.
That's amazing. The unknown, I can't imagine having to deal with that from a mental and physical standpoint, because Misty and I have had several injuries in our life, but we kind of know the injuries we've had, they're going to heal somewhat and we could get back, but this was such an unknown for you.
I think what shaped a lot of my journey with MS was my grandmother had MS, and I saw what that looked like for her at the time. She was bedbound for the entire time that we were growing up, and she had a little electric scooter. It was yellow, and you better get out of the way 'cause she'll run you over. But I knew catheters and bedbound, and I knew that scooter, and that was my vision of MS. But times had changed so much that I had to shift my narrative of what MS was going to look like. And drugs that have come out recently have just made such a tremendous impact that I think it changed the way I viewed things. But it took a little while to get out of that mindset, and I didn't always handle it gracefully, but here we are.
How did you get back? Because obviously the listeners can't see you, but you're strong and you're mobile. And so how did you get back?
I got started on a medication that is very aggressive for primary progressive MS. And there's different types of MS. And there's some that are up and down. So you relapse and then you get back to where you were. Or primary progressive, that is just this slow decline. And I got started on that. And one day I was talking to somebody, and one of the nurses said, "Have you tried this medication?" And I said, "No." And she said, "It's literally called the walking pill." And I Googled it, and it is called the walking pill. And I went into the neurologist and I said, "Why am I not on this?" And so they put me on it, and they started some other medications to help with fatigue. And slowly, through sheer determination, I wanted to surprise Jam and walk again. It was my biggest thing. And so I remember hiding it from her, that I felt like a little bit more feeling in my foot each day. And I just kept at it, and I was going to physical therapy twice a week and just pushing myself as hard as I could. And I would take little steps when Jam wasn't around. And I remember surprising her for that, because I couldn't walk unaided at my wedding. And that was a really big thing to me. And so to be able to surprise Jam with that, so I just kept at it. And then I was on the golf course every week and just trying to be as active as possible, because I think that made a big difference, and shifting my mindset from a woe is me to why am I letting this keep me down thing. As cliche as that may sound, I think that made a big difference.
And you've had to relearn how to walk a couple of times. So it's not like you just went wheelchair bound and then we're walking again. Like you've had some, I don't want to call them relapses because I think that's the wrong word, but where you've lost function again and you've had to relearn how to walk again. And at this point, it's like Jam and I having conversations on the side or just with you where you're like, did you talk to Jam about this? About how we're like, she needs to slow down just a little bit because she's playing golf every day and she's walking around, and we would like you to just rest your leg a little bit more, rest your body a little bit more. But it's impressive that we have to try to get you to slow down at this point.
I think relearning how to walk was probably the most humiliating, humbling, and scary process of my life, because you take it for granted when you're a baby. You don't remember learning how to walk typically. And I know why kids fall all the time. And I fell a lot. And so I don't take that for granted. And I think the reason I push so hard now to keep where I'm at is I know there will be a day that I won't be able to walk again. And I know there will be a day that all of the things that people take for granted, I will not have that ability anymore, and I'm unwilling to settle for anything less while I can. So I want to go out and golf even when people are yelling at me, or I want to not sit on a chair or a bench to shower just to conserve energy, because I cherish standing up in a shower and not having to use a handheld shower device or any sort of assistive devices. So I know I'm stubborn to a fault, and it probably hurt myself sometimes when I shouldn't have, but I don't want to take it for granted. So
whenever July 7th happened, you're recovering from a back surgery, right? But this was before the MS?
It was before the MS.
Okay. Can you describe that that night? And Jam, I want you to jump in here too as well. You were working dispatch for Channel 4. Okay, so that night kicks off around 9:30 on July 7th. And Jam, can you kind of talk about how that went from your perspective? And then I want Gillian to jump in, and Gillian explain where she was and how that affected her.
Yeah, so Jill was off that night recovering from her back surgery, and I was working. So for those of you who don't know, Dallas Dispatch is in the basement of City Hall, and I don't know that it's a small room. It's not large really either, but the room is essentially divided down the center. So one side of the room is north side of the city, the channels, and then the other side is the south side of the city. And it's, 4 consoles on each side. That night I was sitting on you walk into the room, I was on the left side, which is south side of the city. And I was sitting on channel 4, which is the closest console, to the very front of the room, furthest away from the entrance doors of the room when you walk in. So it was just a normal night. We knew that there was going to be, the event going on. We knew that there was going to be the parade, if you want to call it. We knew that there was going to be an event. So based on where I was sitting in the room, the dispatcher that was working the event had her own console and channel. I think it was a tag channel, channel 12. She was sitting working the event. So there was a dispatcher just for that. It was just a normal night. Everything was fine. And then literally, I wish I could, for the listeners, describe the distance between my console and hers. Maybe 5 feet. It was pretty close. It was right next to where I was sitting. The officer just keys up, and you just hear gunfire. That's it, automatic gunfire. And then I think somebody else keyed up and said shots fired, and then it just kind of went to hell. I give the dispatcher credit who worked the event, because that's something a dispatcher never ever wants to hear. And this, I think we knew instantly that it was going to be a large scale thing, because then officers kept keying up and you just kept hearing more and more gunfire. So within the first, I don't know, I'd say like 2 minutes maybe, I think we knew that maybe there was an officer down, and the decision was made by the supervisors standing in the room, one of the sergeants, I believe, to call a citywide signal 1 or signal 15, an assist. So then essentially what that means is all the dispatchers on all the channels keyed up and basically told all the officers, there's a citywide assist, here's the location in channel 1 downtown, essentially clear off what you're doing and everybody's going to go.
And that's extremely unique to have happen, especially in the city of Dallas, that there is a citywide assist in a city this large. Everybody just go, drive, run to the gunfire, right?
Yeah. I didn't even honestly think that was even a thing. Like, they announced it and I took a second and I was like, holy shit. Like, this is historic, essentially. Like, this is not something that happens on the daily. And then all the kind of moving parts, everybody started. And then, so since the location of the assist was actually downtown, because that's where the event was going on, it meant that the dispatcher on channel 1 had to handle everybody that was coming in. So he basically took over the assist and coordinated everything, and he did an absolutely amazing job. And so then it kind of shifted back to the back of the room behind where I was sitting, but everybody was tuned in. And of course, once all of the channels dispatched all of their officers, from a dispatch perspective, since we want to keep tabs on where everybody is and you have to know where everyone's going, all the dispatchers started adding all of their units onto this event, which on channel 1, right? So you're just adding units, and CAD crashed. Within 5 minutes, it just couldn't take the load. So now imagine this craziness is happening on the radio. Our CAD is down. We have no way to do anything. So people are like starting to just handwrite where units are, what's notes, what's coming on the air, because we don't have any way to track it.
Can you describe what CAD is for the listener?
Yes, I'm sorry. So CAD is computer aided dispatch. So I mentioned it before. Essentially, that's how dispatchers dispatch police and the fire department. It's the system that's used for entering calls, and then the program that just essentially runs dispatch. So if it crashes and you don't have the access to that, that's a big deal.
So officers out there listening, that's pretty similar to your in-car computer. It's crashing and you're having to write things down, or go to a more manual approach. Back, 80s, 90s, early 90s, because we actually had computers when Misty and I heard on in the late 90s, and it was looking at it from how it was then till now, it's night and day. Gillian, where were you when this was going on?
I was at home with my sister. We had gone to dinner that night and got home, and we're sitting on the couch, and Jam just texted the word citywide assist. And I've never seen Kristen move so fast in my life. She jumped up and got a portable radio out and started listening. And I believe that was right before I think it was Sergeant Smith.
Yes, Smith.
Mike Smith. We turned it on right before he was shot, and Kristen put her uniform on and left. I had no car, so everybody took my car somehow. I had no way of going anywhere, and so I'm stuck there on a couch, and my sister is at work. Nobody can respond to text messages. Everybody's busy, and rightfully so, but you're sitting there hopeless. I can't communicate with my wife, who's at dispatch, and get updates because they were so insanely busy at that moment, and it was so emotional for them. And then I'm sitting there worrying about my family out there, and a bunch of officers that I knew were downtown. that, you know, you forge these relationships with. It was the most helpless feeling, I think. And I remember waking up the next morning because I went to bed before Kristen got home and running outside to see if that car was there. And it was probably the biggest wash of relief because I knew that I was so fortunate when people weren't, other families weren't.
That day and night affected the city and still affects the city. And I can't imagine being a dispatcher. I mean, watching it unfold on the TV was bad enough, but being in the middle of it, like Jam, I can imagine that sound. It's a unique, on a smaller scale, 9/11 type incident, just citywide assist and just catastrophe. Just pure catastrophe what happened that night. And then those guys, it was several hours before that was settled. I mean, hours.
Yeah, I mean, midnight dispatch was already on for several hours before anything. And just to like make a point, so once CAD crashed, emergencies don't stop, right? So calls continued to come in and we had to dispatch, like I remember sending units to a 6XE, so like a domestic violence situation, a serious one, and all I could give them was like, here's the address, and that's pretty much it. Like you couldn't put officers on it, you couldn't keep track of, I mean, that was kind of it. So they were going blind basically. We didn't have any of the resources that we rely on to help us be successful at our job and keep everybody safe. Like those weren't an option, and they just kept coming.
Picking up, did you go back to work the next day?
Was I off? I think I was actually off.
You had days off next.
I did. And I don't remember if so I know that some of the people from my shift stayed over like into midnights, when mainly the dispatcher that was working on channel 1 stayed because he was still working the event, but like other dispatchers I think stayed to support him and then help out. As far as I know, nobody called out the next day after. If they were like, it was their shift, they came to work. Like you just came in the next day.
Were you guys asked to stay longer than your shifts a lot?
Oh, yes, like just daily. Yeah. So mandatory overtime was a thing. I think actually when we got hired, they mentioned it like, hey, you're signing this document that says mandatory overtime can be something that we can apply if, you know, staffing needs it. But I think the detrimental part of that is there wasn't a lot of notice for us. So because it was so short staffed, people wouldn't come in for their shift and you wouldn't get told, you know, 5 or 10 minutes before your shift ended, your supervisor would come up to you and say, hey, you're going to stay another 8. And that's it. Like you couldn't say no. So you had to sit, maybe in no channel. So again, no break. So I've sat 16 hours at a console without being able to get up. Now that's not every night for sure, but
I think the emotional and mental toll that takes is overwhelming because, and I don't take it for granted now that at the end of my 12 hours, I get to go home. I'm not being held over. And to be in such a busy place as Dallas, where you're just constantly doing something, and then a couple minutes before the end of your shift, you're being told, hey, you're working a 16. And it wasn't once a week necessarily. It was sometimes 2 or 3 times a week because it certainly went by seniority. And we were low man on the totem pole. And so not having that downtime, a break to get up for a moment and just take a breath, and then to be working 16-hour days so frequently is incredibly harmful, I think, to people's mental well-being and their ability to stay sharp. At 16 hours, you're exhausted, and the likelihood that you can make mistakes continues to rise. If you elect to work a 16-hour day, you're taking that responsibility on, saying, I can do this. But if you're forced to routinely do that wears you down. And I know I have not been my sharpest at the end of a 16-hour day before. And I had to do it in Southeast. I was dispatching for Kristen, and it was truly 3 a.m. before I had all the calls dispatched, and you're just on edge. You're tensed up the entire time.
All right, Miss Gillian, we talked about staffing issues, okay, and the 16-hour shift. I've only worked I think I worked a 20-hour shift, and that sucked. But there was an incident involved, and I was exhausted. But people in communications and in this field, they routinely have to work long hours. Is that pretty widespread in this field, communications of short staffing, and how is that usually dealt with?
I think the majority of agencies throughout the country are short-staffed. It's a chronic thing because I think people don't realize the mental and emotional toll that the job takes at times, or people don't realize how difficult it can be, either the computer, the multitasking. You've got to know geography. There's so many categories that people don't realize play into it. So we end up with, you're either there for 20 years or you are a brand new person. There's not a whole bunch of people in the between there. I think a lot of agencies, so with Dallas, they just mandated people. The way we're combating it currently is mandatory overtime. We sign up for a certain number of days of mandatory overtime to fill slots to ensure that we have the staffing, because I sympathize. I work that mandatory overtime too, but the person on the other end of the line, they don't care if we work 16 hours. They don't care if it's 10 or 12 or 13 days in a row. They care about that emergency being addressed. So it's hard because I sympathize, and nobody wants to go in for mandatory overtime, but it right now is, for a lot of agencies, the only way to combat it is to hold people over or to mandate them.
Yeah, so how do you get away? I mean, okay, the work is always going to have to be done, and you could have 3 good days in a row where it's pretty a light few days, and then all of a sudden all hell breaks loose for 3 straight days. There's really no. Usually, a lot of people in professions, they go to work and they kind of know what to expect, right? In first responder world, we don't know what to expect every day because we could have some light days. In dispatching, y'all know what it's kind of going to look like. You're going to sit down, you're going to be engaged with a screen, and you're going to have voices in your ear all day, and you're going to have to quarterback for the first responders the best you can. When you're working these long days, do you, as a supervisor, do you have a process that you get with you huddle with your employees after, and you kind of debrief? And are there programs and that agencies that you've seen put in place to kind of help their employees decompress or just process and have a better work-life balance?
For me, with my employees, especially because currently I'm dealing with mostly newer employees who are doing on-the-job training for call taking, I find it very important after big calls to go talk to them and to just check in, make sure they're okay. I always encourage people, especially if they are struggling after something, to get up and take a break, to take that moment, because if not, it will just snowball down into their performance. I am very big, and I probably spend half my day walking around talking to my little group of people and just engaging with that, just to be present so they know that they have that support. I think mainly just making sure they feel seen so we can combat that. I'm very happy that our agency has partnered with our occupational health center, and we now have a program. We have our own peer support program, which has been amazing and helpful even for me in my personal life. So we have trained people that can help us day to day, but we also have professionals outside of our occupational health center that they can talk to us in that moment if we're struggling. We also have EAP through our insurance providers. So we have a lot of resources where I'm at now. We have quiet room where you can go sit and watch TV and just be in a dark room and relax. And we have coworkers, but it's not that way everywhere. I can safely say it wasn't that way when I was here in Dallas. So I think it's probably something we need to work on as an industry.
I think that where that can start, and what I really admire and respect about you, is you really lead by example. And so, when you're talking about work-life balance, and you guys will sometimes get called in on overtime because, short-staffed. And I've heard you say that you'll go in for your people because you don't want them to have to go in. Or if they're going in, you're going in, because it's not fair to be sending people that work for you in if you're not going in. So I think, can you talk about, in terms of leadership and as a supervisor, how you can really impact the wellness of your employees and the wellness and setting the example for the community or the agency?
I think that's hard for me because I do struggle with a work-life balance. I'm very happy to lecture my my people on it, but I'm not great at practicing it, so I know I don't model those behaviors the way I should. I am very cognizant of where my people are at. I lecture one who likes to work 16-hour days all the time because I want to make sure that he's okay. However, I think as leaders, we have to start, and we have to be the people to say, this is how we want this to look. People will follow if you show that. And if people feel that you care, they're so much more willing to go the extra mile and to step up. I don't know. I had somebody once say the only reason they responded to a staffing page when we asked for help was because they knew if the reverse had happened that I would be in there with them. And that means the world, but I think people just want to know that we're in the trenches with them. And if you are, people will do that. They'll step up.
Yeah, leading by example is really big. And Misty, you were in SWAT. You made a point to lead by example. And when I was out in the field, that's really important, because your troops, they want to know that you're willing to get down in the trenches with them and fight. And Kristen tells me, you're always working, and Jam, y'all are always working. And what shift are you on now?
I am currently overseeing our Calltaker trainees. When they graduate our academy, we have our own one for communications. I oversee their on-the-job training. So I, at the moment, work Wednesdays to Saturdays, which is, Kristen's putting quotes up because that's allegedly I only work Wednesdays to Saturdays, but I like to try and step up when I can. It's not conducive to seeing Jam because my hours and days do not align with our schedules, but
that's when you make just the conscious effort to make the best of that quality time, make quality time when you can.
I think that's why we're here with you guys, spending our vacation with everybody else. That's our version of quality of time, I think.
And yet you're in front of another microphone while you're on vacation.
Maybe that's where we're at home.
Yeah.
I think maybe
you'll start listening to this podcast now that you're going to be on it.
Probably not now.
Oh.
I think that especially Jam, she's been very good in trying to join, my passion is golf, and Jam will go out with me even if she hates it and doesn't play at all. She'll go drive a cart and get beers and bring clubs to me. So I think it's just a compromise and trying to find the energy to communicate, even if you're at the end of the day you have nothing else left, or missing out on sleep just to spend some time together.
I think from my perspective, I get to see Gillian in the supervisory role because I'm on the floor taking calls when, she's up on what we call the bridge, basically an elevated platform in the middle of the room where all the supervisors, that's their little place. She has a console there, so I get to see her working all day. But I think the difference that her position, it's new, but what she gets the ability to do is she really does lead by example, because she would be the first one to sit down at a console and take calls or do police relief or meal relief, or if they're working a fire incident and they need a fire dispatcher, if she was able to do it and she was there, she would go plug in and be a fire dispatcher. And that's not often what some of the other supervisors will do. They're not necessarily as willing to get in those roles that not that I want to say they like moved beyond, but I think some of them feel like it's no longer their job. And she is not the one that prescribes to that belief system, right? Like she, other than just the element of literally keeping up her skills, so she could continue to do those things and do them well at the level that she does them at, I think it really does boost morale. And it is huge. I know just from a personal standpoint, if I saw my supervisor plug in next to me and take calls, I'd be like, hell yeah, man. Thanks for sitting it out with me, right? Because it's can be an ass kick sometimes. And she really tries to essentially, like, she's not going to make her employees do anything that she's not willing to do. And I think that's a tremendous quality that more leaders need to have in the industry.
She doesn't have anything to say about that. So being a workhorse while in the office and on the headset, but you're also a workhorse when it comes to your physical health is a daily constant struggle. And to your workers, they probably see that as well to some point. And that's also inspiring.
I know a lot of people before I promoted saw the damage mentally that I had from the diagnosis and just being in the wheelchair. And I'm sure I made life hell for people because I was just angry at the world. And so I know that was seen, and I know that people have seen that shift in me. I know I missed a day of work the other day, and one of my employees texted me, and he was like, hell must have frozen over. Like, are you okay? Because you're not here. And so I think it feels good that people recognize that. I think people can physically see when I walk that I'm not okay or that I'm struggling that day. I probably get yelled at by them more than my own wife if I'm not resting enough. So I think it is that big family. They're looking out for me, but I'm going to push for them to make sure that they feel that they're taken care of. I don't know if inspirational's the thing, but I think they can appreciate it.
I think it's inspiring to not only work at a high level, but also when you see somebody, it's like an athlete fighting through an injury, right? And they're still performing at a high level, and you know that it's a struggle to fight and push harder. That's inspiring, Gillian.
Thank you, sir.
Why are you all red? I want to talk about the book, the great Dr. Tanya Glenn. She put out, it's Heart Under the Headsets. It's her latest book, and it really is touching on a topic that we're doing the same thing we're doing today. And it's getting kind of a peek behind the curtain of the voice that first responders hear, and you being the quarterback, and you're the one telling us where to go and what to do, and doing it in a way that puts us in a better position to be successful, and also keeping us as safe as you can. You've read the book, right?
I have.
Okay. And you're also, you're one of the featured pics in the book that, Dr. Glenn, you sent some pics, and I made that introduction, and she was more than happy to meet you. And, yeah. So tell us a little bit about that.
I am very appreciative that the book came out. I think it's something that needs to be talked about, and I think I'm guilty of it myself, that we tend to negate a lot of our emotions surrounding how we feel after calls or dispatches because we're not there. So to us, it can't be as bad as what people are experiencing when they're seeing, hearing, smelling, touching things. I shouldn't say hearing, but when you're going through that in person, that's an understandable trauma. But I think this kind of allows people to see that this is a version of trauma. Hearing these things and not having that control is traumatic in its own right, and that you shouldn't be ashamed of that. Because I know I minimize my own experiences a lot. And I think it's incredible that there's a platform to say, this is okay to feel this way. It's validating. And I think that's what we need, because it opens up a conversation that we're able to have and that we need to be having. The same way that a big push allegedly that I've heard from this podcast is that officers talk more about what they're seeing and going through so that they can process, because there is trauma. Destigmatizing it for dispatchers who already feel less than and not seen, giving them a platform to say you are traumatized by these things too, is empowering.
Well, and thank you. Dispatchers are a true vital component of the first responder family, and I think they get forgotten.
I think it's, and I understand how that happens, because we're behind a screen, we're a face you don't see. And one of our old directors in Fairfax used to call it the first of the first responders, and I thought that was super hokey. And I give so much credit to Texas because they recognize dispatchers as first responders. In Virginia, we do not have that yet. We are considered clerical workers. And the difference between somebody, and absolutely not besmirching that profession, but the difference between what we're doing every day when we're providing CPR instructions or we're delivering babies or we're doing these things is so very different than somebody in an administrative role in a job, because you're not hearing that. Somebody's life does not depend on your actions in that moment. And so I think it's awesome when people recognize that dispatchers do make a difference. I think we all say we don't need that, but hearing it is rewarding.
Gillian, I have one final question before we wrap this up. With all your experiences and what you're going to continue to do, and you're going to continue to grow as a professional and as a leader, and you're going to learn new things, and you're still always learning the complex human mind, and being a boss, you're seeing all kinds of different characteristics, all kinds of different personalities. What would you tell a young up and coming dispatcher what skill set they need to sharpen?
I think a couple, if I may. The first is protect your reputation and protect your integrity. We teach an ethics class as part of our state certification, and we always talk about the Washington Post test. Are these actions, if you see them in the news, is that gonna make you feel good? Is that gonna make you feel proud? And the fastest way out of the job is to lie. And so I think that would be the first one. The second one would be never stop learning. Always admit that we are human and there's going to be mistakes made, and just take accountability for that. Have fun. You're going to work holidays. Don't complain. And I think just know that there's no shame in asking for help when you struggle with a call. There's no shame in asking for help if you need another set of ears when you're dispatching high priority calls or longer pursuits or chases. We need to ask for help. We need to destigmatize it, not just from a mental health aspect, but also lending a hand. I think it used to be very uncommon that if somebody had a childbirth or a CPR, we would frequently have somebody else plug in with them. And that never happened before, and it's starting to happen more and more now. And I think that's an important thing, that we're showing we are a team and we're there for each other. And we're not going to judge you if you're upset. I think those would be the main ones.
I think that's a great way to wrap this up. And you really are one of the people that I admire the most. I think you're one of the strongest people I know. And you've always risen to any challenge that's come at you. And I really do look at your leadership skills and hope to be more like that in just my everyday life, my job. So thank you.
You're an exceptional human being, and you just touched all of our listeners' lives. And hopefully, if your warrior spirit is not activated by listening to this wonderful guest, then I don't know what will do it. Thank you.
Thank you for your service. Thank you for spending a day with us here in the nurturing bosom of the OWL office. I can't wait to get this episode out, and everybody hear the incredible story of Gillian Ethridge and her beautiful wife, Jan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far the sun and the moon, I'll never give up on you. Down when you're lonely, I'll pull you up. Life leaves you heavy when the going gets tough. I'll be your shoulder, together we'll run up from the bottom, yeah, we'll rise above. Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far the sun and the moon, I'll never give up on you. Give up on you. Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far for the gold and the blue, I'll never give up on you.